You're listening to Protecting What Matters by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
But you want to make sure that when you're buying a home, that agent specializes in working with buyers and that they're familiar with the area.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Protecting What Matters. I'm your host, Brandon Klein with the Ohio Department of Commerce. Are you in the market to buy a home, a new home, your first home? In this episode, Daphne Hawk, our superintendent of the Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing, will help you become a more educated home buyer. Thanks for joining us, Daphne. I want to start this conversation with how to select an agent. Almost everyone knows several real estate agents maybe, but what if you don't? Where does one start?
Well, the first thing I recommend is to not use an online referral service for an agent. And the reason is that's not necessarily getting you the best agent. That agent may not even necessarily be familiar with the area that you're looking in, but you're being guaranteed that agent is probably paying a fee for that referral, and which means that they're going to be working for less. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the best agent for you.
And speaking of referrals, what if someone is referred to me by a lender or a friend?
That's great. Sometimes that's the best way to find an agent is from a friend who's worked with that person. But again, you want to make sure that you're working with an agent who's familiar with the area. So for instance, Central Ohio is a really big area. I'm familiar with most of the areas, but once we get outside of, Central Ohio, as when I was an agent, I might not be as familiar with an outlying farm area or something like that, and it's best to use a local agent in that scenario.
Speaking of local, it's like, with someone as close as a relative or a friend who's a real estate agent, is that a good option?
There are pros and cons to working with a friend or a relative. You may or may not want to share your personal financial situation with that person. It just depends on the level of comfort that you have. And just remember that, sometimes things can get contentious during a real estate negotiation, and that may affect your relationship if you are not at a place where you're comfortable with that. So you just want to keep that in mind. Sometimes people want to keep business separate from their friendships and family relationships, and sometimes they feel comfortable enough to do it. It's something that you have to weigh on your own.
Well, good advice to keep in mind. What if I go for the top agent in the area based on maybe what I see in advertising or someone who has like a large team assembled?
Well, advertising can be deceptive. That person may not have any business at all, right? But they may just be spending a lot on advertising. But a big team has its benefits. At times, there will typically be a listing agent, and that listing agent will have perhaps a couple other listing reps, but they usually have buyer reps that work for them. And so that could be a good thing, but you want to make sure that when you're buying a home, that agent specializes in working with buyers and that they're familiar with the area. I'm really going to hammer that down today. So it's that the agent is familiar with the area.
Very good point there to stress. And aside from the agent, should I start with, the agent or with the mortgage lender?
I recommend starting with your agent, and the reason is the lenders can be local, they can be far away, but your agent is going to be best suited to determine which local lender, hopefully, or which lender would be best for you in a negotiating process. So I recommend local agents and local lenders, but your agent may have have a relationship already established, and it may be a national lender. That's fine as long as hopefully they have local representation.
And kind of in this one scenario where I get a new job and I'm relocating to somewhere in Ohio, and I'm assigned an agent by my relocation company, what are some factors I should keep in mind about that?
If they select an agent for you and you're getting along with that agent, great. I have had in my past, I was an agent for 26 years, and one time I had somebody assigned to me after they were working with an agent that they did not like, and they were referred to me by a family member. And so I just contacted the relocation company and negotiated my pay with them, and they were okay with that. So I'm not saying that they're all that way, but you may want to ask, because if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And if you're not clicking with the agent you're working with, it can make for a very long transaction, and so you want to make sure that you're working with somebody that you're comfortable with.
And then like another scenario is like if I'm browsing the internet as where I decide to start shopping for homes. I don't have an agent yet, but want to see a house I just found on the internet. What should I do?
You should slow down and find an agent first. I know sometimes it's really tempting to want to go see a house right away, but you want to remember that the listing agent that has the number listed, that person represents the seller. So that person is obligated to share any information shared with them. So if you share with them how much money you make a year, or if you're pre-qualified, or how much you're pre-qualified for, and you share that with the listing agent, that listing agent works for the seller and must provide all of that information to them. And that may, not saying it will, but it may hurt you in the negotiating process. So you will want to make sure that you first select an agent who is going to be working exclusively with you and looking out for your best interest.
And speaking, and this is like the common theme here with between agents and home buyers is, making sure you're aware of what relationship you have with the real estate agent. And so there's kind of like some terms that often come up, like being a customer or a client. Can you kind of explain the difference between the two?
Sure. A customer is someone that, as an agent, I must treat fairly and honestly, but I do not owe them other duties such as loyalty, accounting, obedience, and things like that. So when you first meet an agent and you're going to see a house, they're going to ask you to sign a consumer agency form, and that just means, or the consumer guide is what we call it, and that just is essentially disclosing who that agent works for. They may work for you, they may work for the seller, they may work for both. There's something called dual agency that is legal in Ohio. So you want to look at that consumer guide and understand the different types of relationships that are available to you. A buyer's agent may ask you to sign an exclusive buyer representation agreement, and that simply means that you're promising to work exclusively with that agent in the purchase of your home. And that's something that you have to decide whether or not you want to sign. I personally think it's a great idea because it cements that relationship between the buyer and the buyer's rep, so that you know that they're working in your best interest and they know that you're committed to working with them. And as a client, you have those other duties assigned to your agent, but as a customer, you are simply just someone that the agent needs to be honest with, and but not necessarily working for, if that makes sense.
And I'll become a client as soon as I signed those agreements with the
Yes,
agent.
or you and your agent may just decide verbally to work together exclusively, and that's a conversation you need to have. But at that point, you would also become a client rather than just a customer.
It's your money, come and claim it. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Unclaimed Funds is currently safeguarding more than $3 billion in unclaimed funds. So there's a good chance you or someone you know has money waiting to be claimed. Just head over to our website, unclaimedfunds.ohio.gov, to search your name, the name of a family member, or a loved one to see if you have an unclaimed fund.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Protecting What Matters. We're talking about how to become a more educated home buyer with Daphne Hawk, our superintendent of the Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing. And our next question we're going to talk about is, what are some of the do's and don'ts of going to a house showing?
Well, first of all, your agent needs to get permission, so you can't just show up at the door and expect to get in. So you want to make sure that that you let your agent know and they get it scheduled and get permission. So even if a home is vacant, it doesn't mean that it's, you can necessarily go in any time. So you want to keep that in mind. Some sellers may require up to 24 hours notice on an owner-occupied home. So up to 48 hours for a property with a tenant, and that is for the reasoning behind that is there is a law that they must give 24-hour notice to a tenant in order for anyone to come through the property. Second, if you arrive to the showing and your agent isn't there yet, you need to wait in your car and not engage with the seller who may still be home. Again, this is to avoid a situation in which you might be questioned by the seller and give up information that could be harmful for negotiations. This is also for your safety. It's advisable to get out and walk around. Typically, that's okay, but you want to make sure that no one's home, and you want to make sure that your agent is with you when you do that. Because even walking around the outside of a home, there may be a dog there that you don't know about, or even a neighbor's dog that you may not know about. So just for your own safety, it's a good idea to wait. So if there's another showing in progress, when you arrive, wait in your car for your agent to arrive. Another agent cannot be responsible for anything that might happen. So if you were to come in without your agent, that other agent's not going to be responsible. So the next thing would be to remember that you're a guest in the seller's home. Comply with all the requests, such as removing shoes or wearing booties in inclement weather. Respect the privacy of the seller. So you may typically open closet doors and fixture units, such as kitchen drawers and things like that. But of course, you wouldn't want to open up, their dresser drawers or nightstand drawers or things like that, or medicine cabinets. Those are private property, and we want to respect their privacy. Finally, I guess, stay together as a group. If you must bring children to a showing, please keep them under tight control, because you will be responsible for any damage that might happen. And the other thing is the child could get hurt. I've been on some showings where sometimes the showing instruction will be that there's a dog in the basement or something like that. And if you have a child, going through a house and opening doors, they could very well get hurt. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I guess one thing I forgot to mention is you want to have permission given in advance if you want to take any photos or video of the home. So just remembering that someone still lives there, and so you want to get permission for that. Then speaking of cameras and video, keep in mind that a lot of homes today have video surveillance and audio surveillance, and so you want to refrain from criticizing decor or personal choices or things like that, because those things could also affect your negotiating position later on. And I guess another thing would be to not bring beverages or food with you. If you have those in the car, please leave them in the car, because accidents do happen. And I can recall even people complaining that people would leave a coffee, a cup of coffee on the counter in between showings. And that upsets the seller, obviously, because that doesn't leave a good impression for the next buyer coming through. I think that's about it. But if you, one last thing, and it's probably the most important, don't expect to go to the bathroom in someone's house when they're not home. So your agent will schedule your showings, and they will allow time for bathroom breaks, perhaps at a local coffee shop or their office or something like that.
And that was a lot of good information there. And I think, though, what if there's a situation, though, where I can't reach my agent and I really want to see a house or need something else?
That's a good question. I know a lot of times people get tempted to contact the listing agent if they can't get a hold of their buyer's agent in a situation like that. My first piece of advice would be to be patient, give them a little bit of time to respond to you, perhaps even 8 hours. Your agent may be tied up with other clients, and maybe out of town clients who may take up 8 hours of their time in showings. And that person is getting that individualized personal attention that you desire when you're on appointments with your agent. And so just give them time to respond to you. And then finally, if you can't reach your agent, it's best to call the office where your agent is affiliated and ask to speak to either a manager or a broker or someone else on their team to help you. It's never in your best interest to contact the listing agent in a situation like that.
We've talked a lot about agents in this episode, but kind of going to a bigger perspective, just tell me about the home buying process. How does it generally go?
Well, your agent's going to have a lot of questions for you. They may glean a lot of information by the first 3 or 4 houses that you might pick. Things have changed a lot over the years. Back in the day, I would have people come to me, and we were the keeper of the information. But now it's sort of totally reversed. All of the homes are listed; they're out there on the internet. Some situations, the buyers can even go in themselves without an agent, which I don't recommend. But that's just the way things are moving. But your agent's going to ask you a lot of questions that you may not think about, not just about the home, how many bedrooms, how much square footage and things like that, but sort of like how you use a home. Do you need a home office? Do you need a recreation area? Do you need separate living areas for children to play while you're also perhaps watching, something with your spouse? Where do you spend your free time? Do you want to be close to a mall? Do you want to be close to a recreation facility? Do you want to be close to a racetrack or, a casino? I mean, there are various things that make people choose where they want to live. Many times a commute for us in Central Ohio, we think anything more than a 30-minute commute is insane. But if someone's moving from New York or San Francisco or something like that, they may be used to a 45-minute to an hour commute, and that doesn't bother them. And then, of course, now we're living in a time when commutes aren't even all that important necessarily, because many of us work from home or have the opportunity to have a hybrid work schedule. But all of those things come into play in selecting your home. The next thing that your agent is going to do is they're going to ask you to submit required documentation to the lender to get your pre-approval. The lender may ask for things like your last 2 years' tax records, recent pay stubs, a list of your current debts, a lot of things like that. So once you have that pre-approval, you're set to look at homes. And your agent will send you all the listings that meet the criteria you've set in the area you have selected. You don't have to see every home. I just want to stress that. Sometimes buyers think that, I have to see everything in order to make a decision. The typical buyer looks at 5 to 8, maybe 10 houses before making a selection. And of course, in recent times, it's necessitated to look at more because they'll write an offer on the first one and they don't get it, so they have to go look for more. And those things have slowed down a little bit. But I just to say that you don't want to exhaust the market and look at every single home that's in your price range. That's going to exhaust you and confuse you. I always find that people who look at more than 5 houses in one day, they all start running together. So it's better to kind of break it up. When you have chosen a home in which you want to make an offer, your agent will get to work gathering comparable sales. So what that means is they're looking at other sales in the neighborhood to determine the best price point to make an offer. And that changes depending on the market. In a really busy home buyer market, your agent may recommend that you bid over list price. In a different market, they may ask that you bid under. So it's always best to get the advice from your agent rather than just trying to make that decision on your own. Let's see, what would be next? Your offer includes things other than just price. So it's price and terms. You want those to hopefully be acceptable to the seller. So the price is only one consideration for your offer. Other things that are important to the sellers are things like how are you going to pay? Are you going to pay cash? Or are you going to get a loan? Is your loan going to be an FHA loan or is it going to be a conventional loan? And these things are, it may not seem necessarily fair to the buyer, but these are things that sellers consider. So you have to keep in mind that you want to write an offer that's going to be strong, that's going to be accepted. So if you finance, they want to know who your lender is. That makes a difference. Will you be having a home inspection? And if you have a home inspection, will you be asking for anything to be repaired? In recent months where the market was tight, people were buying homes without home inspections. There's some fallout from that. I know of one particular family who purchased a home, and they have had about $40,000 in sewer and water line repairs because they did not have a home inspection prior to their purchase. So talk about buyer's remorse. That would be a big one. They will also be asking what will stay with the home. So a fixture is something that we define as something that you need a tool to remove. So a mirror hanging in a bathroom, for example, is a good example of what a fixture may or may not be. A bathroom mirror may be just hanging on a nail, or it may be affixed to the wall with molly anchors and screws and bolts and things like that. So when in doubt, just mention it to your agent, and your agent will ask whether or not it can stay with the property. And all of that comes in your offer.
So, and tell me, what are some other terms up for consideration?
Well, one is a home warranty. Will you be asking for a home warranty? Will you be asking for the seller to pay for a home warranty? What's the timeline for closing and possession? Your agent is able to guide you on the best strategy. What they often do, will call the listing agent and ask, what are some things that are important to the seller that we should consider? What kind of time frame are they working with? All of these things are important for that communication, for listing agent and buyer agent to be talking with one another, so that you don't waste your time making an offer that's going to go back and forth 10 times. It's just always easier for the agents to just talk on the phone and find out what the needs are for the buyer and the seller and try to come together on that. Once your offer is accepted, the work for your agent isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. The agent will guide you through the entire process. He will contact the title company and send over the contract, and they'll get to work doing back title research, and they will look back 20 years to make sure that no one else will have a claim to your property, that there are no liens on your property, such as a mechanic's lien or a tax lien or something like that. Those things, if they are there, all have to be remedied prior to closing, and that's the role of the title company. The title company will also be contacting you and asking you for information like your social security number and things like that. And you will want to make sure that when you communicate with the title company that you're doing so by phone. In recent years, there have been phishing emails and things like that, people who will send you an email that it appears that it's the title company. You want to make sure that you actually give them a call and give them that information over the phone rather than doing that through email. Same with wiring instructions. The title company may contact you and give you wiring instructions for the closing. You will want to make sure that you have that information, either hand it over to them personally or give it to them over the phone, rather than responding to an email that may or may not be the title company. The other things that come up are during the home inspection remedy period. There may be things that have to be repaired. You may find something that might be $1,000 worth of repairs. So that's when you go back to the negotiation table and talk with the seller about, whether or not they're going to pay for that, or if you're going to split the cost or what have you. All of these things have to be decided. So sometimes people think that once they're in contract, it's a done deal, but that's really just the first phase. So once you're past that and all of the items are repaired and the request to remedy, then you're going to move forward to closing. And then at that point, typically what you're waiting for is word from the lender that they're ready to fund. And when that happens, then you sit down at the closing table, and that may be a round table closing, or it may be an escrow closing where you actually close separately. And those things change with time. Used to be here in Central Ohio, we always did a round table closing, buyer and seller, and both agents are at the table. And with the pandemic, that changed everything.
What if there's something big that you are sure the sellers knew about and didn't disclose?
That's a hard one. You're probably going to have to get an attorney. And that's really the only way around it. There's no way to really remedy that. And I know that there are some times where people are just positively sure that the seller knew, but we can't possibly know all things. One time I was actually seated on a jury, and it was a buyer. It was a house deal gone bad, right? So the buyers purchased a property, and there were some significant things, and the sellers were elderly though, and they lived in Florida, and much of the year, and so they were unaware of some things that were happening with the house. So even though it seemed obvious to the buyer that they willfully and neglected to share that information, the jury found that the sellers were not aware of those changes that had come to the house while they were gone.
On a completely different subject, but can you tell me a little bit more about deed restrictions and how that comes into play?
Deed restrictions are something that will come up in your title policy, and so it is important that when you get that title policy sent to you prior to closing, that you review it. You want to make sure that there are no deed restrictions that are going to prevent you from utilizing the home in the way that you would like to use it. So, for instance, if you wanted to, have some type of a business out of your home with clients coming and going, you may have deed restrictions against that. You may have deed restrictions about parking a mobile or a camper or something like that out on the street. I remember a neighborhood I lived in, you could have a camper on the street or in your driveway for 24 hours, but no more than. These are, the purpose of a deed restriction is to maintain continuity of the neighborhood. It may be fencing, it may be sheds, all kinds of things like that. One thing that you want to keep in mind is that there are some deed restrictions that will come up in the title search, and if they violate fair housing law, then fair housing law supersedes that. So, for instance, there are some deed restrictions historically at the recorder's office that will say that a person of color or a person who of a certain religion may not purchase in the neighborhood. And of course those things, even though they will come up in the history, of course those things are not allowed any longer. If you need to make an accommodation to your house, for instance, a wheelchair ramp, those types of things, it's a discussion that can be made with the HOA, but they cannot prevent you from putting that in, but they may have some restrictions into the how and the what, the color, and that sort of thing.
What are some of the benefits of home ownership?
Well, the first and obvious benefit is that you're investing your money rather than spending your money. So when you are paying your house payment, you're buying down the principal of the home, and so you're building equity in that home. When you're making your rent payment, you're providing equity to your landlord. So there are some tax benefits. Your interest that you pay on your mortgage is tax deductible. Finally, just community, family, having relationships with your neighbors, being able to do with your home what you want, within reason, of course. We got to talk about deed restrictions, right? So, you can do things to your home that personalize it and allow you to use it in a way that you can't when you live in an apartment or a rented home.
And with that, we'd like to thank Superintendent Hawk for this important information. Please visit our website at com.ohio.gov/real. That's REAL. Thank you for listening to this episode of Protecting What Matters.